In a dystopian future ravaged by a deadly virus, a rebel alliance fights against an oppressive corporation known as Wicked, which conducts inhumane experiments on children to develop a cure. One fateful night, the rebels spot a heavily guarded train carrying prisoners and supplies, igniting a high-stakes rescue mission. Two rebel teams, Jorge and Brenda in one vehicle, Thomas and Vince in another, strategically close in on the train. As chaos unfolds, Brenda skillfully shoots at the train operators, forcing them to alert their reinforcements. Guards emerge with guns blazing, compelling Jorge to maneuver their car while returning fire. Meanwhile, Thomas bravely leaps aboard the moving train, aided by Vince, who narrowly avoids disaster when his vehicle spins out of control. Suddenly, a menacing Wicked aircraft swoops in, raining destruction. Jorge and Brenda veer off to escape its firepower, while Thomas and Vince face relentless soldiers atop the train. In a bold move, Vince plants explosives to sever the cargo section, creating a fiery divide that halts the advancing troops. The duo presses on, their mission far from over. Meanwhile, Jorge and Brenda stage a clever ruse, halting their car to feign surrender. When Wicked soldiers approach, they're ambushed by hidden rebels who neutralize the threat and seize the aircraft. With aerial support now in rebel hands, the tide turns. Back on the train, reinforcements arrive, including Newt, who expertly works to detach a vital train car. As Wicked soldiers close in with unrelenting gunfire, the newly commandeered aircraft swoops down, offering a lifeline. The rebels secure the train car, clamber aboard the aircraft, and narrowly escape as Vince executes a daring leap, ensuring no one is left behind. Together, the rebels deal a significant blow to Wicked while advancing their quest for justice and freedom in a broken world. As the rebels' aircraft gently lowers the liberated train car into their hidden base, cheers erupt from the crowd of freed prisoners. However, Thomas feels a pang of disappointment when he realizes that his close friend, Minnow, is not among them. While Vince rallies the new arrivals with an inspiring speech, explaining Wicked's cruel experiments to harvest immunity for their cure, Thomas grows restless. The rebels, fiercely opposed to child experimentation, focus on repairing a massive ship to escape the mainland. Determined to uncover Minnow's fate, Thomas questions one of the rescued boys, who reveals that the train was headed for an enigmatic place called the Last City, a supposedly non-existent haven. Jorge, recalling his brief time there years ago, explains it as Wicked's stronghold, fortified and nearly impenetrable. Though Vince deems an attack too dangerous, Thomas remains resolute in his mission to save his friend. Tensions rise when the rebels intercept chatter on the radio, signaling Wicked's search aircraft in the vicinity. In a frantic rush, they cut the power and hide as aircraft sweep the area, their glowing searchlights slicing through the dark. The rebels remain undetected but realize their hideout is no longer safe. Late that night, Thomas attempts to slip away alone to rescue Minnow, but he is intercepted by Newt and Frypan, who refuse to let him face the dangers without backup. Elsewhere, Minnow awakens in the eerie confines of the glade from his past experiments. The familiar yet unsettling setting twists into a harrowing nightmare as he chases ghostly figures into a corridor leading to a labyrinth. From the shadows, a monstrous griever emerges, driving Minnow into a desperate race through blocked passages. Amid his terror, disjointed voices echo around him, scrutinizing his every move as if part of an experiment. Trapped and frozen in place, Minnow fights against the unnatural force only to find himself pressed against the ceiling. A terrifying confrontation with the griever ends with Minnow's agonized screams and a chilling reveal: he's trapped in a lab simulation, subjected to Wicked's latest blood extraction experiments. Meanwhile, Thomas and his team face their own terror. While navigating a pitch-black tunnel, they're ambushed by zombie-like creatures known as cranks. Desperation mounts as the cranks pound on their vehicle, and chaos ensues when one leaps onto the windshield, battering it with inhuman strength. Frypan, thinking quickly, swerves close to another vehicle, managing to knock the creature off before speeding away from the relentless horde. The car crash leaves Thomas and his friends shaken but alive. As Thomas smashes a window to escape, Frypan quickly follows suit, just in time to spot an advancing crank. His precise shot takes the creature down, but a horde emerges from the shadows, forcing the group into a frantic sprint. Surrounded and out of options, their salvation comes in the form of Jorge and Brenda, who barrel through the creatures with their car. Amid flying bullets, the boys scramble into the vehicle, and Jorge speeds away, narrowly escaping the tunnel. Emerging onto the open road, the group catches their first glimpse of the last city, shrouded by a foreboding wall erected by Wicked. Meanwhile, Ava, Wicked's calculating leader, faces mounting pressure from the board as public hope for a cure dwindles. She assures them progress is underway, citing Minnow's contributions, but skepticism grows. The tension peaks when Teresa interrupts, rallying the board with a speech about perseverance, ensuring continued funding for their morally dubious experiments. Back on the outskirts of the city, Thomas's group arrives at the slums, where desperate protesters clamor for aid. Unbeknownst to Thomas, the tattoo on his neck glows faintly, betraying their location to Wicked. As they try to blend with the crowd, chaos erupts. The city's defenses activate, unleashing a storm of bullets and explosions that send civilians scattering in panic. Thomas and his friends barely make it back to their vehicle before masked figures ambush them, dragging them into waiting vans. At their captor's hideout, tensions flare as Jorge attacks a masked figure only to stop when Brenda's safety is confirmed. Gally, thought to be dead, unmasks himself, prompting Thomas to lunge at him in anger. Newt intervenes, convincing Thomas to listen. Gally explains his change of allegiance and introduces Lawrence, the disfigured leader of the local rebels. Hooked to a serum that wards off the crank infection, Lawrence offers a deal. He'll help Thomas infiltrate the city if they repay the favor. Thomas, Newt, and Gally navigate the city's underbelly via sewers. Emerging under cover of night, they note Wicked's heightened security, proof the rebels' presence hasn't gone unnoticed. Gally leads them to a hidden vantage point overlooking Wicked's facility, where Teresa's presence is revealed. While the others debate using her betrayal to their advantage, Thomas hesitates, prompting a heated exchange with Newt. The confrontation ends with Newt confessing his infection, pushing Thomas to set aside his feelings. Inside the lab, Teresa's excitement over a supposed cure derived from Minnow's blood is dashed when the serum fails spectacularly. As desperation mounts, her path crosses with Thomas in the city. After a charged confrontation, Teresa is captured by Gally and taken to a rebel hideout. Under pressure, Teresa reveals Minnow's location in a heavily secured lab and reluctantly disables the trackers embedded in the boys' necks. Disguised as Wicked soldiers, the group infiltrates the facility, guided by Teresa. They rescue prisoners, only to find Minnow missing. Discovering he's been moved to another lab for a dangerous procedure, Thomas, Newt, and Teresa race against time. Meanwhile, Gally retrieves the precious serum and helps evacuate the children, but the arrival of more soldiers forces Brenda to flee in a stolen bus. Thomas and Newt face relentless obstacles, battling soldiers, and narrowly escaping multiple ambushes. In the lab, Minnow proves his resilience, taking down guards and scientists with resourceful ingenuity. The trio eventually reunites, but danger looms as Jensen and his forces close in. Pinned down, the boys make a daring leap into a pool below, evading capture. As they emerge from the water, surrounded yet again, their savior appears in the most unexpected form, Gally, who dispatches the enemy with unflinching precision. Meanwhile, Brenda drives furiously through the streets, fending off pursuing Wicked vehicles in a high-octane chase. As the enemy vehicles bear down on her, Brenda skillfully forces one to crash into a signpost. But the relentless pursuit continues, culminating in a tense moment when she turns a corner to find the street completely blocked. Thinking quickly, she shoots a flare into the night sky, its light catching the attention of Frypan, who has been stationed inside a crane nearby. Frypan expertly lowers the crane hook into the street. Brenda, wasting no time, leaps from the bus to attach the hook before rushing back inside. With a whir of machinery, Frypan hoists the bus into the air, causing it to swing precariously, smashing against buildings before being flung over the city wall. As the chain stretches under the weight, the bumper begins to buckle, so Frypan adjusts the chain to minimize the impact. The bus lands with a thud, momentarily upright, before toppling over. Remarkably, everyone on board emerges unscathed. Meanwhile, in the depths of Wicked's lab, Teresa uses the stolen gauze to analyze Thomas's blood. Her findings are astonishing. His blood doesn't just suppress the virus, it eradicates it entirely. Filled with urgency, Teresa presents her discovery to Ava, insisting they must locate Thomas at all costs. Back at the rebels' hideout, Brenda and Frypan are dismayed to find it abandoned. They soon learn Lawrence has rallied the slum dwellers, preparing for a final stand against Wicked. Riding atop a truck laden with explosives, Lawrence leads a swelling crowd to the city gates, determined to breach Wicked's fortress. Though the security team attempts to activate defenses, the rebels' hacking disables their systems. Forced to fire manually, the guards fail to stop Lawrence's truck from slamming into the entrance. The resulting explosion tears a gaping hole in the wall, and the crowd surges into the city. Amid the chaos, Thomas and his team navigate the labyrinthine streets while assisting Newt, whose condition continues to deteriorate. Explosions reverberate as police units swarm to confront the invaders. Taking shelter in a building, Thomas contacts Brenda, urging her to leave without them. Refusing to abandon her friends, Brenda enlists Jorge and Vince, who arrive in a stolen aircraft to evacuate the children. Brenda persuades them to rescue Thomas as well. Spotting the aircraft, the boys make their way toward it. Newt, however, falters, his strength waning. Realizing time is running out, Thomas urges Minnow and Gally to safeguard the serum and board the aircraft. Newt entrusts Thomas with a necklace and pleads for him to leave, but Thomas refuses, carrying his friend despite the odds. As Newt succumbs to unconsciousness, Teresa's voice echoes throughout the city. She implores Thomas to return, revealing his blood holds the cure and could save Newt. Meanwhile, Minnow and Gally successfully reach the aircraft. Torn between choices, Thomas hesitates, only for Newt to awaken as a crank. The ensuing confrontation is heart-wrenching. Newt, in his crank-fueled state, attacks Thomas, begging him to end his suffering. Thomas resists, hoping against hope for a solution. When Newt reaches for his gun to take matters into his own hands, Thomas knocks it away. Desperation drives Newt further into madness, and he lunges at Thomas with a knife. Though Newt's frenzied strike leaves a minor wound, Thomas manages to fend him off, the weight of their friendship and this tragic moment etched into every move. As Newt's infection consumes him, he launches one final attack on Thomas. Struggling against the weight of their history, Thomas is left with no choice but to push the knife into his friend, ending Newt's suffering. Overcome with grief, Thomas collapses beside his fallen friend just as the rest of the team arrives with the serum. Tragically, it's too late. Consumed by anger and despair, Thomas storms back to Wicked's building. Inside, Thomas confronts Ava, who claims she can save everyone and promises to spare the children if he cooperates. Thomas hesitates, dropping his weapon. But before a resolution can be reached, Jensen appears, shooting Ava and sedating Thomas. When Thomas regains consciousness, he's strapped to a stretcher in a lab. Teresa works hurriedly to extract his blood, while Jensen unveils his plan to reserve the cure for the elite. Revealing his own infection, Jensen prepares to inject himself with the serum. In a sudden act of defiance, Teresa smashes a bottle over Jensen's head, momentarily incapacitating him. She frees Thomas, but Jensen retaliates, tossing Teresa across the room. A fierce brawl ensues between Jensen and Thomas, spilling into the corridor. Though Jensen briefly gains the upper hand, Thomas refuses to relent. Their struggle reaches a deadly impasse when Jensen draws a gun. At that moment, rebel rockets strike the building, disorienting Jensen and giving Thomas and Teresa a chance to escape.